Hello and welcome to the next painting tutorial. The subject of today's video is the Whizkids Owlbear, a really nice miniature. Needed a tiny bit of cleanup just around the shoulder. There's a bit of a nasty seam line, but a bit of Mr. Dissolve putty soon sorted that out. As you can see, I'm applying once again, even though the model's pre-primed, I want to give it a coat of Chaos Black. It's the basis for the colour modulation, and seeing as I'm going to be using the Citadel Contrast Paints, I really want to make sure that there's a solid base coat with plenty of contrast for the paint to take advantage of. So just being really thorough, making sure you get all the surfaces, and using a turntable is very useful because it means obviously you don't have to handle the model, you can just move it around on the turntable itself, so you avoid getting any fingerprints in the finish and causing any problems later on. So once the black base coat was applied, I noticed that the shoulder joint still wasn't fantastic, so I applied a bit more Mr. Dissolve putty with a scalpel, just using as little as possible, working it into the seam line and just wiping any excess away with my finger, as you can see there. It went back and basically, once it dried a little bit, using the tip of the scalpel, just restored some of the fur texture to avoid a sort of flat spot to make it blend in as seamlessly as possible. So once that imperfection was dealt with, it was time to add the actual shadow coat itself. So a coat of light grey was sprayed over the model, trying to simulate a light source, but in this case, because I was using the translucent contrast paints, trying to just add a little bit more over the model, just to give the contrast paint something to work with. So I added a little bit on the back as well, where I might not do so normally, just to really get some contrast in the fur. And obviously areas such as the face, I went back and added a little bit more just to really highlight, because that's obviously the focal point of the model itself. So the priming and pre-shade done, I mixed up some Gore Grunter fur contrast paint using some contrast medium just to thin it down. I thought I could always apply another coat if it wasn't quite suitable. So using a long wash brush, because obviously it retains a lot of the paint, just gave it a pretty generous coating all over the model. Didn't try and flood it, but certainly really just making sure that the contrast paint went into all the details, and straight away it was a nice effect. The pre-shade grey in contrast to the black really brought out the best of the paint, and it produced an interesting effect. Now obviously, as far as I can see, the idea with the contrast paints is that you kind of leave it there. It's a speed painting technique, but I thought it would just be interesting just to use that as a base coat, a starting point as it were, for the overall finish. So as you can see here, making sure that every nook and cranny's been taken care of, and even as it's stood, just as that's done there, it looks really quite a nice finish. So the model was left overnight to dry, and then I applied some washes using Nuln Oil Black Citadel wash just around the undersides, just to really accent the shadows, and then some Agrax Earth Shade just on the upper surfaces to bring out details like around the eyes. They're really quite an imposing part of the miniature, and it just acts as a filter really, just to say accent all the details for the dry brushing process. So with the base coat pretty much done, I started on the dry brushing using Moonfang Brown as a base. This was brushed all over the model quite lightly to bring out the raised fur detail, and it worked really nicely against the dark base coat. I gradually added Zandri dust to the Moonfang Brown to produce successively lighter coats, and these were used more sparingly the lighter the paint became. Areas such as the face around the top of the head received the lighter coat to obviously draw the eye to that area, but also to simulate a light source as well. So as you said, by the end of the process you're hardly adding any paint, just really light coats, almost accents just around the face and so on and so forth. So the next step was to paint the eye, and for this I used a base coat of Evil Sun Scarlet with plenty of paint retarder in the wet palette, and then using golden yellow blended in as the further we got to the centre of the eye to produce really quite a striking effect. Once this was dry, I added a wash of Fugan Orange just around the sort of rim of the eye to again increase the contrast and to produce really quite an eye-catching effect, literally. So then the mouth was painted, and I added some gloss Reichland Fresh Shade to really bring out the detail before painting the teeth. Next step was to add some washes to the claws that I'd painted with Ushabti bone, and the beak as well, just very carefully adding some just to bring out the detail. And then I went back and added another wash to the eyes just to really accent what I'd done already. So getting towards the end of the build, I decided to use some MIG oil brusher washes diluted with white spirit. These are really nice because they're very thin, and by capillary action they'll really go into the recessed details, something that the Citadel washes maybe won't do quite so well. So areas of interest such as around the eyes receive a dark brown wash just to really bring out the detail, and see random feathers on the back, again trying to accent the light and shade really. Just being very selective. It's not an overall wash, it's a pin wash. See, just on the top of the head I'm adding some there, just the demarcation line between the head and the neck, and on the underside I'm applying a thicker coat to again create some light and dark, basically accent the shadows that are there already. Now the final stage was using some oil brusher black, used very sparingly. Once again, you can see around the eyes, received an extra treatment to really bring out the yellow to really form a good contrast with that, and just around the beak, areas of interest such as the claws and anything else, just random areas that I thought would benefit from highlighting. And with that, the actual model itself was pretty much finished. So the last stage was to add some texture to the base. So I used the Vallejo mud and grass mixture and slopped it on with a big brush, using a smaller detail brush to get around the claws and so on and so forth. Doesn't matter if a bit goes on the model, it kind of blends it in. And that pretty much finished the whole project. So yeah, it was interesting using the contrast paints for the first time. That, coupled with the dry brushing the washes, produced quite a nice effect, something I'm going to be using in the future. And with that, the model was done. So here we see the finished owlbear. It's really good fun. Used some, obviously, so the contrast paints I hadn't used before, and the MIG oil brusher washes, which was an interesting departure, not something that I think many miniature painters use. The next video will be focusing on the Whizkids face spider. Hope to do some different highlighting and translucent effects with that. So once again, thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe, give it a like, and leave a comment, and I shall see you next time.